The rancher was dying in the desert until an Apache woman whispered, "I have the medicine." His ranch stretched for miles in the heart of Arizona, and he knew every ridge, canyon, and waterhole like the back of his hand, or so he thought. That morning, the sun rose golden and hot, casting long shadows over the dry, dusty ground. Samuel saddled his old horse, Duke, and prepared to check on the cattle grazing far from the main ranch. He had done this routine 1,000 times before, but that day, something felt different, a subtle unease he couldn't explain. The desert was vast and beautiful, but it could also be cruel. Samuel had grown up hearing stories about travelers who underestimated its dangers. Heat could sap strength quickly, and a single misstep could leave a person lost and helpless. But Samuel, confident in his experience, brushed aside the warnings. He had survived many summers under the scorching sun, and he believed he could handle whatever came his way. As he rode deeper into the desert, the landscape began to change. The familiar red rocks gave way to rolling sand dunes, and the path became less clear. Samuel urged Duke forward, scanning the horizon for the small signs of his cattle, hoof prints, grazing marks, and the occasional lowing in the distance. Hours passed and the sun climbed higher. Sweat poured down Samuel's face and the dry wind stung his eyes, but he pushed on. Around noon, the sky suddenly darkened. A sandstorm, sudden and fierce, swept across the desert. Samuel tried to turn Duke back toward the ranch, but the wind and dust made it nearly impossible to see. The horse stumbled over uneven ground, and Samuel gripped the reins tightly, praying they would both make it through. The storm felt endless, blinding him and leaving him disoriented. When the wind finally died down, Samuel realized he had lost all sense of direction. The familiar landmarks were gone, replaced by a sea of shifting sand. Panic began to creep in. Samuel had always been resourceful, but now, with no water and the scorching sun overhead, he felt the first real fear of his life. He knew he needed shade, but there were only small, scattered bushes and a few jagged rocks. He led Duke to a rocky outcrop, hoping for a brief respite. The horse was exhausted too, its sides heaving as it pawed at the sand. Samuel tried to calm both himself and Duke, taking deep breaths despite the dry, hot air that seemed to burn his throat. He found some relief in drinking sparingly from the water bottle he had packed, but it was not enough. The desert had a way of making small problems into life-threatening ones. Samuel felt his energy draining with every step, every heartbeat heavier than the last. His mouth was dry, his vision blurred at the edges, and he stumbled as he walked, barely holding onto consciousness. It was a feeling he had never experienced before, the helplessness of being completely at the mercy of the desert. As evening approached, the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson. Samuel knew he could not survive another night without shelter. He tried to find a shallow depression in the sand where the wind had carved a natural little nook. There he lay down, shielding himself as best he could from the chill that came after the blazing heat of the day. His mind wandered, thinking about his family back at the ranch, the meals he had missed, the laughter of his children. Guilt gnawed at him. He had always taken the land for granted, assuming it would always be there, always forgiving. Now, facing the desert's indifferent power, he realized how small and vulnerable he truly was. Hours passed, and darkness covered the land. Samuel heard the faint sounds of the desert at night, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustling of small creatures in the sand, the eerie whistle of the wind through the rocks. Each sound reminded him that he was alone, utterly alone, in a place that knew no mercy for the careless or the unprepared. He tried to stay awake, afraid that sleep would mean giving into the desert and never waking again. But exhaustion overpowered him, and he drifted into fitful sleep, waking occasionally to the cold night air that nipped at his sunburned skin. By the next morning, Samuel felt weaker than ever. His mouth was parched, his lips cracked, and his skin was red and raw. Every movement was painful, and the once confident rancher was reduced to staggering across the sand with no clear goal in sight. The thought of finding help seemed impossible. He had no compass, no maps, only his fading memory of the paths he had ridden so many times before. It was in this state of desperation that he noticed something unusual on the horizon, a small figure moving steadily toward him. At first, Samuel thought it might be another traveler, a rancher like himself, but as the figure came closer, he realized it was a woman, walking with a calm and purposeful stride. She seemed almost to float over the sand, her presence striking in contrast to the harshness of the desert. Her long hair was dark as the night, and her eyes seemed to hold the wisdom of the land itself. Samuel's first instinct was caution. He had no idea if she was friend or stranger, but his body begged for help. When she reached him, she knelt by his side without a word, examining him carefully. Then, almost in a whisper, she said something that sounded strange yet comforting. "I have the medicine." Samuel's eyes widened. Could she really help him? His throat was too dry to speak properly, so he simply nodded, hope flickering in his chest like a fragile flame. The woman produced a small bundle of herbs and a bit of water, offering them to him gently. Samuel drank the water in tiny sips, feeling a cool relief as it passed down his throat. The herbs she crushed in her hands, and the aroma alone seemed to awaken something within him, reminding him of the life he had nearly lost. He followed her instructions as best he could, taking the herbs and applying them as she directed. Slowly, with careful attention, she tended to his burns, rubbing the mixture over his raw skin with skillful hands. That night, under the dim light of a small fire the woman had made, Samuel felt a warmth he had not known for days. For the first time since he became lost in the desert, he slept peacefully, safe in the knowledge that someone who understood the land and its secrets was watching over him. The woman's calm presence and quiet confidence gave him something he had not felt in a long time: hope. By the time the sun rose again, Samuel felt stronger, though still fragile. The desert was still vast and unforgiving, but now he was not alone. He began to realize that survival was not just about knowing the land or being strong. It was about learning from those who truly understood it, those who had lived with it and respected it all their lives. He did not yet know the woman's name, but he knew that meeting her had changed everything. His journey through the desert was no longer just about endurance. It was about trust, humility, and learning a wisdom he had never sought before. As he prepared to continue, guided by her careful instructions, Samuel knew that this encounter would mark the beginning of a journey that would test him in ways he had never imagined. The desert had humbled him, and the mysterious woman had given him the gift of life when it seemed lost forever. The vast, empty land no longer felt indifferent, it felt alive, waiting to teach those who were willing to listen. And Samuel, for the first time in his life, felt ready to truly learn. By the next morning, the desert seemed less harsh to Samuel Hayes. He had survived a night in the cold, the strange quiet broken only by the distant calls of coyotes and the whisper of wind through the sand. But more than the physical recovery, it was the presence of the woman, mysterious and calm, that gave him hope. She had not spoken much, only offering directions, advice, and quiet guidance, but Samuel felt her understanding of the land was profound, almost magical. He had no idea who she was, yet he knew that without her, he might not have survived even one more day. The woman's name, he soon learned, was Ahioka. She told him this one morning as the sun rose behind the red cliffs, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold. She did not explain much beyond her name, only that she knew the land and the medicine it offered. Samuel realized that asking too many questions might seem rude to her, so he simply listened, absorbing every word and gesture. For several days, Ahioka guided Samuel through the desert, slowly helping him regain his strength. She showed him how to find water in unexpected places, such as in the roots of certain plants or by digging in the sandy riverbeds where moisture still lingered beneath the surface. She taught him which plants were edible and which could soothe the body when it was sunburned or dehydrated. Samuel watched her carefully, realizing that she had learned these lessons over a lifetime, and the depth of her knowledge made him feel both humbled and awed. Each day was a challenge. Samuel had grown up on the land, but his life on the ranch had been easy compared to the harsh reality of surviving without modern conveniences. His hands were blistered from digging for water, his skin still red from sunburn, and his legs ached from climbing rocky slopes. Yet, with Ahioka's guidance, he began to move with purpose again. Her presence gave him courage. Where he had once seen only danger, he now saw opportunity. The desert was no longer an enemy, it was a teacher, and Ahioka was his guide. As they traveled, Samuel tried to repay her kindness. He helped gather firewood, carried heavy supplies, and assisted her in whatever tasks she deemed necessary. Ahioka accepted his help without hesitation, though she seemed more concerned with teaching him than receiving aid. Samuel learned that survival was not about dominating the land but working with it, respecting its rhythms and understanding its secrets. The desert demanded patience, observation, and humility, lessons Samuel had never learned in the comfort of his ranch. At night they would make small fires, carefully hidden behind rocks to avoid attracting animals. Ahioka would prepare simple meals using herbs, roots, and whatever small game they could find. Samuel ate slowly, savoring every bite, feeling the strength return to his body. The food was unlike anything he had tasted before, simple yet nourishing, made from ingredients he had never considered edible. And while the meals were small, they seemed to carry more than nutrition. They carried a sense of connection to the land itself. During these quiet moments, Samuel began to ask questions not about her past but about the land. "How do you know where the water is?" he asked one evening, his voice hoarse. Ahioka smiled faintly. "You listen," she said. "The land speaks if you pay attention. The stones, the plants, the wind, they all tell a story. You just need to hear it." Samuel nodded, realizing that he had spent his entire life on the land without truly listening to it. The desert had been there long before him, and it would remain long after he was gone. Respecting it rather than trying to control it was the only way to survive. As the days passed, Samuel noticed a change not only in his body but in his mind. His fear, which had been so strong when he first became lost, began to fade. Confidence returned, but it was no longer the brash certainty he had once carried. Now it was tempered by respect and understanding. He followed Ahioka's guidance without hesitation, trusting her instincts, and slowly began to feel like he could survive in the desert again, not just for hours, but for days if needed. One afternoon, as the sun beat down mercilessly, Ahioka showed Samuel how to use a small cactus to find water. She explained how certain plants could store moisture and how to extract it without harming the plant. Samuel marveled at her patience and skill, trying the method himself under her watchful eyes. When a small trickle of water finally ran into his hand, he felt a surge of triumph. This was not just survival, it was learning to live in harmony with the desert. Ahioka nodded, pleased, and for the first time, Samuel saw a hint of warmth in her usually calm demeanor. Trust grew between them with each passing day. Samuel began to rely on Ahioka's knowledge not only for survival but for guidance. When he began to feel weak or discouraged, her presence alone was enough to steady him. She did not scold him for his mistakes or impatience. Instead, she quietly showed him the correct way, letting him learn through experience. It was a kindness Samuel had never known. On the ranch, he had been a man used to giving orders, used to controlling situations. Here, in the desert, he was a student, and the lessons were humbling yet deeply rewarding. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned purple, Samuel sat beside the small fire they had built. He watched Ahioka carefully prepare herbs for the night, her hands moving deftly and confidently. "Why do you help me?" he asked softly, unsure if he should even ask. Ahioka looked at him, her eyes reflecting the dying light of the sun. "Because you needed it," she replied simply. "The land provides, and sometimes we must help one another. That is how life continues." Her words struck Samuel deeply. She did not seek reward or recognition. Her only concern was survival, balance, and the flow of life. Over time, Samuel also learned that the desert held unexpected beauty. The way the morning light hit the red rocks, the quiet majesty of the stars at night, and the small desert flowers that bloomed briefly after a rare rain, all of it, was a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, life persisted. Ahioka taught him to notice these details, to respect them, and to find hope in them. Samuel realized that the desert was not just a place to survive, it was a place to understand life, resilience, and patience. By the end of the week, Samuel felt almost like a new man. His body was stronger, his mind sharper, and his spirit renewed. He no longer felt lost or helpless. He had learned to read the signs of the land, to understand its hidden ways, and to respect its power. And though he had not yet returned to his ranch, he felt an inner strength he had never known before, a connection to the desert and to the woman who had taught him so much. The bond between Samuel and Ahioka was quiet but profound. Words were often unnecessary. Their understanding came from shared experience, mutual respect, and the survival lessons of the desert. Samuel realized that he had been given far more than life-saving medicine. He had been given knowledge, wisdom, and a new way to see the world. And though he did not yet fully understand Ahioka's past, or how she had come to possess such knowledge, he knew that meeting her was the turning point in his journey, one that would shape the rest of his life. As they prepared to continue deeper into the desert, Samuel glanced at the horizon, feeling both excitement and trepidation. The journey was far from over, but now, for the first time since he had become lost, he felt capable of facing whatever challenges lay ahead. He had discovered that survival was not merely about endurance. It was about humility, observation, and trust. And most importantly, he had learned that sometimes, the wisdom of others could save not only life, but the very way a person sees the world. As Samuel Hayes grew stronger each day, the desert no longer felt like a place of fear. He had survived the blazing sun, the cold nights, and the endless stretches of sand, all with Ahioka's quiet guidance. Yet, the desert still held dangers he had never imagined, and he knew that his journey was far from over. He had learned to trust her wisdom, and he followed her instructions carefully, knowing that one mistake could cost him dearly. Ahioka was patient but firm in her teachings. She showed Samuel how to move silently through the desert, how to notice subtle changes in the environment, and how to read the tracks of animals that might bring either food or danger. One morning, she stopped him abruptly and pointed to a small trail in the sand. "See these tracks?" she asked. "A rattlesnake has passed here recently. Stay alert." Samuel's heart jumped. He had seen rattlesnakes before on his ranch, but here, in the wild and unforgiving desert, their bite could be deadly. He nodded, careful not to make any sudden movements, and followed her lead as she guided him safely around the path. The desert seemed peaceful at first, almost welcoming, but it was filled with hidden challenges. One day, as they navigated a rocky canyon, Samuel's foot slipped on loose gravel, sending him tumbling down a small slope. He landed hard, wincing in pain as he rubbed his scraped leg. Ahioka was immediately by his side, her hands steady and confident as she examined the injury. She cleaned the wound with a small bit of water and applied a mixture of herbs she carried in a leather pouch. Samuel marveled at how skilled she was, how quickly she could turn a potentially serious injury into a minor inconvenience. He realized that her knowledge was not just about survival, it was about understanding life itself, every living thing and the delicate balance of nature. Over the next few days, they encountered more challenges. A sudden storm swept through the desert, sending strong winds and stinging rain across the open landscape. Samuel had learned to anticipate such changes, but he was still amazed at Ahioka's calmness in the face of danger. She led him to a natural shelter formed by overhanging rocks and small boulders, where they huddled together and waited for the storm to pass. Samuel watched the rain pool and run over the desert floor, carrying away loose sand and leaving behind glistening stones and small, hidden pools of water. He realized that even in its harshest moments, the desert provided life and sustenance if one knew where to look. One evening, as the sun began to set behind distant mountains, Samuel and Ahioka faced a new challenge. A pack of coyotes had detected their presence. The animals were curious but cautious, their eyes glinting in the dim light. Samuel felt a flicker of fear, but Ahioka moved calmly, whispering instructions. "Stay low. Do not make sudden movements. They will leave if we are patient." Samuel followed her guidance, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The coyotes circled at a distance, sniffing the air, but eventually lost interest and disappeared into the shadows. Samuel breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that this was a lesson in patience and observation, one he would never forget. Through these experiences, Samuel's respect for Ahioka grew. She was not just a guide. She was a teacher, a protector, and a friend. He noticed the care she took with every step, every decision, as if she were listening to the desert itself. She explained that the land had a voice, a rhythm, and that those who ignored it often paid a high price. Samuel had ignored it once, nearly losing his life, but now he understood the truth in her words. Survival was not about brute strength or stubbornness. It was about awareness, respect, and harmony. As they traveled, Ahioka shared more of her knowledge. She taught Samuel how to find edible plants hidden among the rocks, how to track small animals without startling them, and how to use the stars for navigation at night. Samuel listened carefully, realizing that every lesson was valuable, not just for surviving the desert but for understanding life in a deeper way. He began to see connections between the smallest details, the color of the sand, the shape of a cactus, the direction of the wind, and the larger patterns of the world around him. One particularly challenging day, they came across a dry riverbed where the sand shifted unpredictably. Samuel had to step carefully, watching for unstable patches that could swallow his foot or send him tumbling. Suddenly, he heard a hiss nearby. A rattlesnake, coiled and ready to strike, lay hidden beneath the sand. Samuel froze, heart pounding, unsure of what to do. Ahioka stepped forward without fear. With precise, confident movements, she guided Samuel back to solid ground and instructed him on how to avoid similar dangers in the future. Samuel felt both fear and awe, fear at the closeness of danger, and awe at Ahioka's skill and calmness. The experiences continued to shape Samuel in ways he had never expected. He began to feel a sense of partnership with Ahioka, a silent understanding that grew with each challenge they faced together. She did not treat him as a burden or a student. She treated him as an equal, capable of learning, capable of growing, capable of surviving. And Samuel, in turn, respected her not just for her skill but for her wisdom, her patience, and her deep connection to the land. One night, as they rested under a sky filled with stars, Samuel reflected on the changes within himself. He realized that he had entered the desert as a man confident in his own abilities, yet unaware of the true power and unpredictability of the land. He had been humbled by his experience, but he had also been given a second chance. Ahioka had not just saved his life, she had opened his eyes to a way of living that was more connected, more aware, and more meaningful than he had ever imagined. Their bond deepened not only through survival, but through shared moments of quiet reflection. Samuel watched Ahioka move with ease through the desert, noting how she seemed to anticipate the movements of animals and the shifts of the wind. He asked her questions about the stars, about the plants, and about the signs of approaching storms. Ahioka answered patiently, often with simple phrases that carried profound meaning. Samuel realized that wisdom was not about speaking many words, but about understanding deeply and acting with care. As the days turned into a week, Samuel began to notice subtle changes in himself. He was no longer merely surviving. He was thriving in a way he had never known. His muscles grew stronger from walking long distances, climbing rocks, and carrying supplies. His mind was sharper, alert to the smallest signs of danger or opportunity. His spirit felt renewed, filled with a quiet confidence born not from arrogance but from understanding and experience. One afternoon, as they approached a rocky ridge, Samuel paused to rest, gazing across the desert that stretched endlessly before him. The sun cast long shadows over the sand and the air shimmered with heat. Ahioka sat beside him, watching him quietly. "Do you see?" she asked softly, gesturing to the horizon. "The desert is not empty, it is full of life. You just need to know how to look." Samuel nodded, realizing that he had learned to see the world differently. Every plant, every rock, every movement of wind or sand held meaning, and he had learned to listen. By the end of this part of their journey, Samuel understood that the desert was more than a place to test endurance. It was a teacher, a healer, and a guide. And Ahioka was the person who had unlocked its lessons for him. She had shown him that survival required more than strength. It required observation, respect, patience, and trust. Samuel had grown not only physically but spiritually, discovering a connection to the land that he had never known. Even in moments of danger, he no longer felt fear as he had at first. The rattlesnakes, coyotes, shifting sands, and sudden storms were still threats, but now he met them with knowledge and awareness, guided by the wisdom Ahioka had shared. Their journey together had become a partnership, a quiet agreement that they would face the desert as a team, learning from it, respecting it, and surviving through it together. As night fell, Samuel looked at Ahioka and realized that he had not only survived the desert but had been transformed by it. She had shown him the true meaning of resilience, patience, and harmony with nature. And although he did not yet know how much farther their journey would take them, he felt ready for whatever lay ahead, confident that with her guidance, he could face any challenge and emerge stronger, wiser, and forever changed. By now, Samuel Hayes had grown stronger and more confident in the desert. Yet the landscape around him remained unpredictable, and he understood that danger could come at any moment. With Ahioka by his side, he felt prepared, but he also knew that survival required constant awareness. Every step, every glance, every movement needed to be deliberate. The desert had a way of testing those who entered it, and Samuel was about to face its harshest lessons yet. One morning, as the sun rose in a brilliant gold sky, Ahioka led Samuel along a narrow canyon. The walls of red rock towered over them, casting deep shadows in the early light. They were following a small trail that would eventually lead to a hidden spring, a place where Samuel could refill his water supply and rest for a longer period. But the desert had its own plans. A sudden tremor beneath their feet made Samuel stumble, and dust and pebbles slid down the canyon walls. Ahioka's calm voice cut through the panic. "Stay close and move slowly," she instructed, guiding him step by step over the unstable ground. As they descended, Samuel noticed the remains of a small landslide, a reminder that the desert was alive with shifting earth and hidden dangers. He was grateful for Ahioka's experience, for without her guidance, he could have been seriously injured. Every movement she made seemed instinctive, as if she had been reading the desert for years. Samuel realized that her knowledge was not only practical but deeply connected to intuition, a skill born from a lifetime of living in harmony with the land. Later that day, they faced another challenge. A pack of wild coyotes emerged from the shadows, drawn to the scent of their presence. Samuel's heart raced, but Ahioka remained calm. She whispered instructions, telling him to remain still and low, to move with purpose and caution. Samuel followed her guidance, watching as the coyotes circled at a distance. Their eyes glinted with curiosity, but Ahioka's steady presence seemed to command respect. After what felt like hours but was only minutes, the coyotes eventually lost interest and slinked away. Samuel felt a mix of relief and admiration. He realized that survival in the desert was not just about strength or courage. It was about patience, observation, and respect for the creatures that shared the land. As they continued, Ahioka taught Samuel more about the desert's hidden sources of sustenance. She showed him how to find small pools of water beneath the sand, how to identify edible plants, and how to track animals for both food and safety. Samuel followed her instructions carefully, grateful for every bit of knowledge she shared. Each lesson was a reminder that the desert, though harsh, was also generous to those who approached it with respect and humility. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they came across a small natural spring tucked between rocky outcrops. Samuel's heart lifted at the sight. For days, he had been living on minimal water and sparse food, and this spring represented not only physical relief but a sense of accomplishment. Ahioka taught him how to test the water, filter it using natural materials, and store it safely for the journey ahead. Samuel marveled at her wisdom, realizing that every action she took was deliberate and rooted in a deep understanding of the land. But the desert was not yet done testing them. As they rested near the spring, a sudden sandstorm began to rise on the horizon. The wind howled, carrying grains of sand that stung the skin and burned the eyes. Samuel felt panic rising, but Ahioka remained calm. She instructed him to find shelter among the rocks and to cover his face with cloth to protect against the flying sand. Samuel followed her guidance, amazed at her composure in the face of danger. The storm raged for hours, but they emerged unscathed, their bond strengthened by the shared experience of surviving nature's fury. During the storm, Samuel reflected on how much he had changed. Before this journey, he had believed that strength and determination alone could overcome any challenge. Now he understood that true survival required more than physical endurance. It required awareness, humility, and a willingness to learn from others. Ahioka had taught him these lessons without judgment, through her actions, her knowledge, and her unwavering calm. Samuel felt a deep gratitude for her guidance, knowing that he would not have survived without it. The following days brought new challenges. As they navigated a series of rocky ridges, Samuel struggled with fatigue and muscle soreness. He was not used to the constant physical demands of desert travel, and every step required effort. Ahioka noticed his exhaustion and encouraged him to rest, sharing stories of her own experiences in the desert and how she had learned to listen to her body and respect its limits. Samuel realized that strength was not about pushing through pain blindly, but about understanding one's own body and pacing oneself wisely. One afternoon, as they climbed a steep slope, Samuel spotted a rattlesnake coiled among the rocks. He froze, unsure of how to proceed. Ahioka moved with quiet precision, guiding him away from the danger and teaching him how to spot the subtle signs of the desert's hidden threats. Samuel marveled at her confidence, her ability to remain calm under pressure, and her deep understanding of the delicate balance between humans and nature. He realized that every encounter with danger was an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to deepen his respect for the land and for Ahioka's wisdom. As they traveled, Samuel also learned the value of teamwork and communication. He discovered that surviving the desert was not a solitary endeavor, but required cooperation, trust, and mutual support. Ahioka's guidance had shown him that the desert was unforgiving, but it also offered opportunities for those who were willing to work together, observe carefully, and respect its rhythms. Samuel felt a growing sense of partnership, a quiet understanding that they were stronger together than they could ever be alone. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of color, Samuel and Ahioka faced a critical moment. A sudden drop in temperature and the approach of a new storm forced them to find shelter quickly. They huddled together among the rocks, sharing warmth and conserving energy. Samuel marveled at Ahioka's ability to remain calm, to assess the situation, and to act decisively under pressure. He realized that survival was not just about avoiding danger, but about making wise decisions, staying composed, and trusting in one's knowledge and instincts. During these quiet moments of reflection, Samuel felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had entered the desert as a man unprepared for its challenges, relying on his own strength and confidence. Now, he was transformed. He had learned to listen, observe, and respect the land. He had learned patience, humility, and the value of guidance from those more experienced. Most importantly, he had formed a deep bond with Ahioka, whose knowledge, calmness, and wisdom had saved his life and taught him lessons that would last a lifetime. As the storm passed and the desert settled into a quiet evening, Samuel realized that he was no longer the same man who had set out to check his cattle days ago. The desert had tested him, challenged him, and humbled him. He had faced danger, exhaustion, and fear, but he had also discovered resilience, wisdom, and a deeper understanding of life. And through it all, Ahioka had been his guide, protector, and companion, showing him the way with patience, skill, and quiet strength. By the end of this part of their journey, Samuel had not only survived the harshest challenges of the desert, but had also grown into a man who understood its rhythms and respected its power. He realized that true survival was not just about strength or endurance, but about awareness, patience, and the ability to learn from those who had mastered the land. And as he looked at Ahioka, standing calmly beside him with her gaze fixed on the horizon, he knew that their journey together had forged a bond that went beyond mere survival, a bond built on trust, respect, and shared experience. The desert had tested Samuel Hayes in every way imaginable. He had faced the scorching sun, the biting cold, dangerous animals, and treacherous terrain. He had endured exhaustion, hunger, and fear. Yet through all of this, he had grown stronger, wiser, and more aware. And most importantly, he had discovered a profound connection with Ahioka, the Apache woman who had guided him, protected him, and taught him the true meaning of survival. By now, Samuel could move confidently through the desert. He knew how to read the signs of approaching storms, how to find water hidden beneath sand and rocks, and how to navigate by the sun and stars. He could identify edible plants, track animals, and avoid dangerous predators. But more than these practical skills, he had learned patience, humility, and respect for the land. He no longer viewed the desert as an enemy. He saw it as a teacher, a living, breathing force with lessons to offer those who were willing to listen. One morning, Ahioka suggested that it was time for Samuel to return to his ranch. They had traveled for weeks, and he had regained his strength. The knowledge and skills he had gained would allow him to survive on his own if needed. Samuel felt a mixture of relief and sadness. He had come to depend on Ahioka's presence, her guidance, and her quiet wisdom. Leaving the desert meant leaving her, and he realized that he had grown to admire her deeply, not only for her skills but for her patience, courage, and understanding of the natural world. As they prepared for the journey back, Ahioka reminded him of the lessons he had learned. "The land will always test you," she said softly, "but you have learned to listen. That is the most important skill of all." Samuel nodded, feeling the truth of her words in every fiber of his being. He had learned that survival was not about force or stubbornness, but about observation, respect, and harmony with the world around him. The journey home was not easy. even with Samuel's newfound skills. They navigated narrow canyons, climbed rocky ridges, and crossed stretches of sand that seemed endless. Yet Samuel felt a sense of confidence he had never known before. He moved with purpose, following Ahioka's guidance, and noticed details in the desert that he had once overlooked. The tracks of animals, the scent of water hidden nearby, and the subtle changes in the wind that signaled an approaching storm. Each observation reminded him of how far he had come and how much he had grown. Along the way, they encountered more challenges, though none were as dangerous as those they had faced earlier. A sudden drop in temperature one evening forced them to find shelter quickly. Samuel applied the lessons he had learned from Ahioka, using natural materials to create insulation and protect themselves from the cold. He marveled at how much he had changed. He was no longer a man at the mercy of the desert, but someone who could respond to its challenges with skill and understanding. As they neared the outskirts of the desert, Samuel began to recognize familiar landmarks. The distant hills, the winding paths, and the scattered rocks reminded him of his home. A feeling of relief washed over him, but it was tempered by a sense of gratitude for the journey he had undertaken. The desert had been harsh, but it had also been a place of transformation, teaching him lessons he could never have learned anywhere else. When they finally reached the edge of the desert, Samuel's ranch came into view. The familiar sight of his home, his fences, and his cattle brought a wave of emotion he could not contain. He had survived the desert, yes, but he had also returned with something far more valuable: knowledge, humility, and a new perspective on life. Ahioka had guided him not only to safety, but to a deeper understanding of himself and the world around him. Samuel turned to Ahioka, ready to thank her for all she had done. "I don't know how to repay you," he said sincerely. "You saved my life, and you taught me more than I could have ever imagined." Ahioka smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the wisdom of someone who had lived in harmony with the land for many years. "You carry the lessons with you now," she said. "That is all the repayment I need. Remember what you have learned and share it when the time is right." With that, she turned and began to walk back toward the desert, her figure gradually blending with the colors of the land. Samuel watched her go, feeling a deep sense of respect and admiration. He knew that he might never see her again, yet he also knew that her influence would remain with him forever. The desert, once a place of fear and uncertainty, had become a source of wisdom, strength, and understanding. And Ahioka, with her calm presence and knowledge, had been the key to unlocking it all. Returning to his ranch, Samuel found his family and neighbors worried but overjoyed to see him alive. He shared the story of his journey, speaking of the challenges he had faced, the dangers he had encountered, and the lessons he had learned. He described the kindness and skill of Ahioka and how she had saved him when it seemed all hope was lost. His listeners were captivated, not only by the tale of survival, but by the deeper truths he shared: the importance of respect, patience, and harmony with the natural world. Samuel's life changed after his desert journey. He became more thoughtful, more observant, and more respectful of the land he had once taken for granted. He paid closer attention to the needs of his cattle, the cycles of the seasons, and the subtle signs that indicated changes in weather or water sources. He applied the lessons Ahioka had taught him, not only for his own benefit but to help others who worked on the ranch. His neighbors began to notice the difference, and they too learned from his experiences. Though life returned to a sense of normalcy, Samuel often thought of Ahioka and the lessons she had shared. He realized that survival was not only about facing danger, but also about understanding the world, respecting it, and learning from those who possess wisdom beyond what one can see. The desert had been harsh, unforgiving, and challenging, yet it had also been a place of growth, healing, and transformation. Samuel would never forget the moment he first saw Ahioka, her calm presence in the midst of his fear and desperation. He remembered the whisper of her voice, "I have the medicine." Those words had been the beginning of a journey that had changed his life forever. The medicine she offered was not only the herbs that healed his body, but the knowledge, patience, and understanding that healed his spirit. Over time, Samuel shared his story widely, speaking not only of the desert's dangers but of its lessons. He taught his children to respect the land, to observe carefully, and to listen to the wisdom of those who understood it deeply. He spoke of Ahioka, the Apache woman who had guided him, not as a mysterious figure, but as a symbol of knowledge, patience, and the quiet strength that comes from living in harmony with nature. Years later, when Samuel rode through the desert on his ranch, he felt a sense of connection that went beyond ownership or control. He noticed the subtle signs in the sand, the way the wind shifted, the small tracks of animals moving quietly across the dunes. He moved with care and awareness, remembering the lessons Ahioka had taught him. Though she had long since disappeared into the desert, her influence remained, guiding him in every decision, every movement, every observation. Samuel Hayes had survived the desert, but more importantly, he had been transformed by it. He had learned that life was not simply about strength, determination, or courage. It was about awareness, respect, patience, and the willingness to learn from those who possessed knowledge beyond what could be taught in words alone. Ahioka had shown him the way, and in doing so she had given him more than life itself. She had given him understanding, wisdom, and a new way of seeing the world. And so, as Samuel returned to his ranch, tending his cattle and living each day with care and attention, he carried the lessons of the desert and the memory of Ahioka in his heart. He had faced the harshest challenges, survived them with skill and patience, and emerged transformed. The desert had tested him, the storm had challenged him, and the wild had pushed him to his limits. But in the end, he had learned the most valuable lesson of all: that life, like the desert, is best navigated with respect, awareness, and the guidance of those who understand it deeply. Samuel would never forget the desert, nor the woman who had whispered those life-changing words, "I have the medicine." Those words, simple as they were, had opened the door to a journey of survival, trust, learning, and transformation. And though the desert stretched endlessly beyond the horizon, Samuel knew that its lessons, and Ahioka's guidance, would remain with him for the rest of his life.